Hello, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon keynote. I'm Kimberly Fakih, Senior Editor at School Library Journal, and I'll be speaking with David Macaulay about his new book, his Endless Curiosity, Massive Inquisitiveness, and Other Flattering Topics. Mostly, we want to know how he keeps every book fresh. I'm so excited to welcome David Macaulay, Mammoth Math, companion to Mammoth Science, and we're just going to let him talk about, I don't know, everything today. Welcome, David.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
Thank you. We know that you're always responsible for the art, of course, but we wanted to sort of talk to you about some of your collaborative process through many of your books. You mentioned yesterday, sort of, we were talking about how Neil Ardley did the text for The Way Things Work and other collaborations. Can you just talk about how we got the text down for Mammoth Math and maybe even reaching back through Mammoth Science a little bit? Like how did you organize this book? Where did it come from?
Well, the great news is I didn't have to organize it. One of the wonderful things about working with Dorling Kindersley is that they take on the organizational challenge. So there is some sense of what the book might be. I'm kind of, because of the mammoths, I just follow the mammoths. Where the mammoths go, I go. And the mammoths were lured into this book about science because somebody at DK thought it might be fun to bring the mammoths back. And I think they were right. I wasn't sure at the time. It seemed a little unfair to take advantage of the mammoths who've been happily retired for like 25 years since the way things work. But I look back now and I think it was the right idea. Now, in terms of organizing, you know, there's an editor, there's an art director, there's another illustrator there who's helping with sketches and so on and so forth to try to capture. We talk to each other through Zoom. They are the only people not in this country. They're all in London and scattered around. I'm on the other side of the Atlantic holding things down over here. So, you know, once a week we would talk about some of the new ideas that needed to be communicated and try to sort of just kick some ideas, kick some thoughts around about how this might be done visually. Out of that will emerge not text, but a list of the things that need to be covered, maybe a sketch if I'm lucky, of sort of what they are thinking. Sometimes the sketches are, you know, really right on the money, and I just kind of do them my way. And other times they're just the beginning of a conversation that could drive us all crazy after a while. But this collaborative process has been, it's so essential. This is a book that's probably done in about, I don't know, 5 months, something like that, from beginning to end. The great thing about working with DK is that when they set a deadline, they're not kidding around. There's a real deadline that has to be met. And that doesn't mean they start when they say they're going to start. It just means the deadline does not change. So I see this time somehow getting squeezed, but nevertheless, the interaction we have has become so terrific, so sort of inspiring in a way. And we keep the ideas flowing back and forth across the Atlantic. And eventually, you know, what arises is what I think is going to be the best sort of visual solution to the problem. And it's at that point, I think, for the most part, that the problem is actually transformed into real text. That seems to come after. So there's no finished book. There's no finished manuscript awaiting my magical touch. We are conceiving this thing in real time over the period of 5 months. And there are, you know, I have pages like this. Like this is a section of the book, a little bit of a layout. You can see the gaps in here. That means we have no idea yet what we're going to do with these spaces. So we go with the ideas that seem the clearest and the most manageable. And then sort of I settle in and come up with what I think is going to work. And it may get tweaked a little bit and so on. And then I can sit down and do the finished art. Meanwhile, the next idea is coming in and the next meeting is about to happen and so on and so forth. It's kind of an exhausting process, but it works. And it creates, I think, in the end, a very lively, in this case, playful, in the case of Mammoth Math, particularly playful reaction to what could be a relatively unplayful, in the minds of many people, topic.
Well, this is fascinating because I had friends at the public when they were putting together Hamilton, and this sounds kind of how they were putting that together, where there was always several scenes happening at once, and the song and the choreography and the way it was staged and things were, we have a couple of slides of finished art. I think the Fibonacci sequence we had coming up, and maybe you could just, if Rebecca can put the slide up, you could show us sort of how, did they say your assignment today is the Fibonacci sequence go, or how can you show us how that worked?
Yes, no, in a way, that's what they said. We're doing the Fibonacci sequence. And I said, the what? So I had to learn that, and I had to learn the spelling of Fibonacci's name and
Yes.
that thing. And then I have to keep saying to myself, 1 + 1, 1 + 2, 2 + 3, 3 + 5. But the goal in the end for me was to sort of visualize this, how you put this sequence together. Forget the numbers for a second. Just, starting with squares, a million squares, all exactly the same size, and you put them together in a particular pattern, which is what you see happening in this illustration. Let me show you this. This was the sketch that I got to start with. This is how it began. And what it is it's more like a page from, their eyewitness series with lots of, sort of individual little images and captions. There's and these are the examples in nature of the Fibonacci sequence. This is where you can find it, but there was no story. There was no kind of drama here. So in the end, I sort of developed this little sequence where we've got an artist guy. He's an artist because he's got the red beret on, and he's got one square, and he's drawn the little curve from one corner diagonally across. And then when you get, and put another one next to it, and you can do half a circle, and then you have 4, and that becomes the big square now, but it's made up of the 4 small squares, same size always. And you can see how if you follow the step 1, step 2, step 3, all the way across the page to step 4, you're kind of following the Fibonacci curve.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily think that. Now, the payoff was, so what is this for? What do we need this for? Well, you need it to be able to build a really fantastic slide so that you can build it in an amusement park for the shrews to climb up to the top of it, to slide down and then run across the grass and get on the stairs again, climb back up to the top and do it over and over again, a kind of helter-skelter, as they would say in England, but basically a terrifying slide, as we would say over here. So, that's kind of how it happened. And I think the slide was the last thing that occurred to me, but you can see in the corner of this illustration, the lower right-hand corner, a little bit of a maze. And there is a full maze on another spread. That's part of it. And it sort of set up the idea that there might be this amusement park in the middle of Mammoth Shrew Land. No, that was not on anyone's list at the beginning of this process. Nobody thought about an amusement park, all sort of that would come together. But there are a number of images in the book that took advantage of the fact that this thing had evolved. And you can see some tents, and you can see the maze, and you can see this, and you can see the section at the end on probability, also a structure built in this amusement park. That's why it was so terrific to be able to kind of jump around from thing to thing, keeping in mind some of those images that might lend themselves to other situations in the book that would help tie the whole thing together. And it was a very organic process. And I think that's why it works. That's why it feels a little bit surprising. We were surprised too. But in the end, it feels like one book. It has a kind of unified color sense, backgrounds, and so on and so forth. Plus, there are elements on these spreads that reappear, maybe in slightly different ways, but that help link the information together. So it's just a fun journey to turn the pages.
I have to say the chaos doesn't show, like it just feels of a piece. And I'm someone who read it from page 1 through page 88 or whatever it ended up being. So, it worked. You pulled it off. Now going to go through it and look for flaws, but
We all paid attention to those little things, though. I think we all try to keep those things in our heads and think, hold on to that for later because it just might be useful. And that's the reward you get is some sense of continuity that seems planned.
when did you find out that you were sort of, my late husband used to say, you're an explainer in chief, go, and this came handy when we homeschooled my daughter for a while. When did you find out you were an explainer in chief?
When I read some of those early reviews and it said it. It was never my plan. It's not on my list of things to accomplish in life. It just got used. I was given a medal. Now it's the Humanities Medal. It was the something, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of the medal, but it became the Humanities Medal. So at the White House, and Clinton used that term, and he picked it up from reviews too, or his people had. And I thought, okay, well, that's very flattering. The danger of being assigned that label is that the assumption is that you know all this stuff. If I knew all this stuff, I wouldn't do these books. There would be no point. There are people who know so much more than I do, on whom I depend for getting the right information and the things prioritized and all that sort of stuff, without whom I couldn't do it. I mean, there's just no way. My job is really translator. That's how I think of myself, as a visual translator. It's how I learn. It's how I begin to understand what these smart people teach me. I try to draw what they're telling me. And if I can draw what they're telling me, I'm beginning to understand what they're saying. If I can't draw it yet, it means I haven't drawn it enough. I haven't sketched it enough. But that process is my way of learning. I'm not a word guy. I never really liked reading, sorry, especially as a kid. I mean, reading, but give me a book with pictures and I was happy as could be. I could read those pictures. So I think explainer's a little over the top. Translator is a much more comfortable setting for me.
Well, did you come at this? I have trouble believing you were math neutral starting this book. Were you a math phobic or mathaholic, or?
I have to say I was closer to neutral. I mean, I was okay with math. I didn't look forward to it, but I could do it. And I seemed to pick it up fairly quickly. Okay. I didn't seek another math problem as soon as I'd finished long division. Oh, give me something more complicated. No, that was not me. But I managed to, get it under control, and I was okay in those things once I bothered to memorize the times tables. So I am sort of neutral, but in a way, I'm neutral about many of these subjects. I'm neutral about science. I find it fascinating, but I'm not driven to just explain science or to be the translator of this math book, or all the thousands of machines in the way things work. And that's not. I don't live for that. I don't live for doing a 400-page book about machines, but I'm sure glad I did it, and I learned a lot. And even though I've forgotten a lot since 1988 when that book came out, at least I know where the book is on my shelf, so I can pull it off and read it again and make myself feel smart again.
We had another slide. I wanted to just look at it on was it polyhedrons?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I just found this really beautiful. I love the shrews. They're snacking. I think that kids don't really get treated to seeing how accessible math is this way. And I just wondered maybe about your inspiration point for this particular spread.
Oh, I think if you can eat math, you got it. I mean, to digest this stuff, so to speak. But I think to me, what's interesting about this illustration is that we talked about the way things evolved in an organic way, but not necessarily a predictable way. The first images were more like this. This is my drawing of the mammoth, right?
Your Trojan mammoth.
This, and here, right, the Trojan mammoth, and here we've got a bunch of the polyhedrons on shelves. That came back from DK London. And so I start putting this stuff together, and but the shelves aren't really interesting enough. So you end up with something that looks like this. And I'm showing this only because I can. And secondly, because it sets up the drawing, it sets up the slide you have on the screen, which is behind the scenes. And we just thought, wouldn't it be fun to get behind this shelf? What's going on back there? Well, that's where you snack. That's where the worker shrews take lunch breaks and so on and so forth. Perhaps they dance. But
Right.
it also allowed us to get this little guy who's hiding in, who got locked in the box kind of by mistake,
Right.
who comes running out and is released and free to join his friends and enjoy the cookies and biscuits and cheese and so on. So it's, again, a very kind of natural process. And we stick the little what is it called? The little piece in the corner with the examples of polyhedrons. It's not necessary to draw each of those, in full scale in this background, but it is important to take advantage of the fact that that's the general topic here. So the story idea here is what draws you into this thing, I think, and the amusement that you get. But the information is then supplemented by this little panel. There you go. Panel in the corner. So
Yeah.
oh,
No,
I just wanted to show you one more thing because I happen to have it. I found this. Here's this is a little model I made, and it's only the front of the model. I don't have to draw the whole thing, but there's the model, and it started as a hexagon. It ended up as 3 triangles and a square. I think more like a pentagon. But I wanted to see, and then a cylinder, triangles, trapezoid in here, and a rectangle in here. So I just wanted to see if it would actually work in 3 dimensions. So, and that's just like Scotch tape and like 5 minutes worth of cutting and so on and so forth, snip and schneering. So anyway, that's.
Yeah, and seeing how the shadow falls and, just giving kids that look at it. No, I really think there's so much to pour over in this, and the begrudging, one of the other begrudging, I told you about a really grudging review where the man said, you've ruined science books forever for my child. He thinks all science books are that good. There was another one that said, after checking it out 3 times from the library, we had to go buy a copy, and I think that's just such a funny way to review a book. But there's a lot to look at in this book, and I don't think people will forget. I don't think children will forget these facts. And I just love looking at it. So,
but if you approach, as you clearly do, a book like this, turning the pages and you have a smile on your face the whole time, isn't that the way you want to start? Introduce someone to math or someone to science. A smile, you don't have to be laughing hysterically. You just have to be open. And my goal is really to create images that are engaging enough so that you just want to sort of read this visual story a few times and then become, wait a minute, what is that word? What is that little paragraph? What does that say? And you might just feel comfortable enough from what you've learned from the images to begin to read some information. It's a gradual process. It's not like you have to read it the first time and know everything for the test. No. It's just a way of being lured into the complex world around us, but also the everyday world with math, and not start by being afraid or, that's the plan.
It's a good plan. It's a good plan. Well, first of all, they start by they're still turning the page,
Yes.
then we'll get the smile, and then
That's
we'll keep moving. No. Well, I wonder, crossing on time, I think everybody sort of cheered that you'd finally given away something autobiographical. There's young Macaulay on his stomach in one scene and things like that, about your voyage to America. Is this a product of the story that captured you about William Gibbs? Are you starting to think back on stories from, that you want to cover? Are you becoming, like all of us, long in the tooth I'm not saying you're long in the tooth, I'm saying I'm long in the tooth. Starting to think over some of the old stories of, I don't know, a childhood in England or things like that. Are you getting more autobiographical or memoirish?
Yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. I guess it's that point, it's that point in my life when I start to think about these. I've never stopped thinking about my childhood in England because it really was an ideal childhood. I was not, as I implied earlier, a reader so much, loved pictures and books, loved being read to. I remember my fourth grade, fifth grade teacher reading a little bit of Wind in the Willows to the class at the end of every day. And we worked through the whole book, and I just couldn't believe it, because when I walked home from school, I walked through woods. I walked along a stream. That's how I got from this huge brick 3-story building to our house, which was one of the row houses in Bolton, in Lancashire. But I was in the Wind in the Willows on the way home. And but in my head now was, Ratty and Mole and Toad and so on and so forth. And the world of Ernest Shepard, who I would not really fully appreciate for years, but have, since admired tremendously, his gift. But so that was a great childhood. And I do like looking back on that, because it was a childhood that had me outside playing on my own, safely, day after day after day. It was a small house, as we all had. And my mother was dealing with my younger sister, a year younger, and my brother, 7 years younger. And so when I volunteered to leave the house, she was delighted. One less body in this one room in which we basically lived, with the kitchen, dining room table. The living room was kept for company, because you had to have a sitting room for company. They never showed up, but nevertheless, it was clean and it was always predictable. But so my mother was glad when I took off for the woods. And when we moved to the US, one of the first things they did, this is in Bloomfield, New Jersey, was buy me a bicycle for my birthday, a 26-inch bicycle. And I was all over that part, Bloomfield, Brookdale, all over that part of New Jersey. Much scarier than the north of England as a 10-year-old kid. But it was that sense of freedom that my parents gave me, and somehow trusted that it would be okay. And somehow it was okay. But I may not have been developing my reading skills or even my math skills or that sort of stuff so much, but I was certainly developing my curiosity, and in turn, my imagination. I've never stopped asking questions about things. And the ability to ask questions and keep asking questions is how I get to a point where I feel I understand something enough to be able to explain it to someone else and feel like I've done my job. I got it right. And that's the satisfaction. I have to learn this stuff. And as I said earlier, I learn through the building, through making these little models, through sketching and things of that nature. That's how I teach myself. And if I can encourage that in any way with the kinds of images I create, I hope there's enough in the math book. So the things that are drawn sort of complete are also invite a dissection on the part of the curious reader, so that they could build one of these themselves, whatever it is, whether it's the 3D mammoth or the Trojan mammoth or one of the other objects. Even in mammoth science, some of those things that were created that are kind of silly, but I want to stimulate curiosity. I want to stimulate imagination. And the great thing about the math book is, of course, it connects to everything you see when you go outside. I mean, whether it's architecture, whether it's the shapes of windows and doors, whether it's the lines on the street and the distances, whether it's the number of bushes in front of a house or the pattern, it's there all the time. And I really do want people to notice the world around them for all the pleasures it offers, as well as, sadly, all the lack of pleasure it offers too, or the worrisome aspects of it. But there's just so much to feed on. But it requires that you pay attention. It requires you open your eyes and look and ask questions, and the rewards then flow.
Well, you've just contributed to my working theory is that what real intelligence is curiosity without an agenda, you know, just an open mind without looking for the answer you want to find, but really looking. I wish we didn't have 3 minutes left, because then I would let it end right with your last sentence, but I have to take at least one question from the audience, which is, you know, do your own children read your books? In my house, the answer is no, they don't. They don't care about my books at all. How about yours?
No, that's true. They don't read my books. I used to give them a book when it came out. Said, look, here's the new book, guys, and they'd be grateful and so on and so forth. I expecting that they will eventually take those books and maybe read them, but certainly know where they are and have them in a special place and so on and so forth. I mean, what all they know is that I'm not around a lot. That's because I'm locked in my studio trying to finish the next one and make it good enough to use up all that paper and ask people to take it off the shelf and read it. So they sort of know the books as the reason I haven't been around a lot. But do they read them? No, I don't think so.
Are you going to, someone asked, are you going to tell us what your next book is, or is this under wraps? I wasn't able to find any hint anywhere.
No, let me just show you this. Can you see the spine?
Yes.
That's the next book.
Is that when it's due?
Is that what?
Is 6/11/22? That's the day I turned 64, by the way. But
oh, no kidding. Well, that's why I did that. That's why I knew we would meet, and eventually this would actually resonate with someone else in the world. No, I'm in the early stages, like about 6 months worth of a book about how Earth works.
Wow.
So that is, yeah, I wanted to tackle something smaller and more manageable. So
thank you.
now I say that, I'm not even sure what that means, you know, how
I know.
Earth works. I don't even, it's taken me 6 months to sort of begin to focus in on what will matter. But talk about learning, talk about asking one question after another, and you get to the end of a day of questions and you look at the sketchbook and I think, I'm really onto something. And then I think of another question, and that starts the next day and more pages of the sketchbook. And I'm still searching for relevance here. This is not a moment in time to do a book about Earth that doesn't have some relevance. I do not want to repeat what's already out there online, in books, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I can't wait. I mean, I will.
Please do.
That sounds amazing. So, well, keep us posted. I have to just, it's the end of the conversation. I have to say thank you so much for spending what was the fastest half an hour of my life with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kimberly. It's been a pleasure.
A real pleasure. And thanks everyone for attending. Next up, we have 2 concurrent sessions on how to build a family and picture this about community. And tweet today, tweet about David, tweet about Picture Book Palooza, hashtag Picture Book Palooza, and visit our sponsors in the exhibit hall. Thank you again, David Macaulay, for all your wonderful books, and for Mammoth Math, and for the shrews, the thousands of shrews, and for being you. And thank you, audience, and for giving us your time today. And everybody go have a good day. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. I'm Kimberly Fakih for SLJ.
Take care.